Hey y'all, this is Brown at I Have Brown, and tonight we're going to be talking about the story Just Friends, starring the Beast, aka Hank McCoy, from the X-Men, X-Factor, and the Avengers. The guy really got around when it came to group memberships, but Just Friends was an 8-part storyline that took place in issues 85 through 92 of the anthology comic Marvel Comics Presents. And one of the cool things about this particular book was that it would oftentimes spotlight lesser-known characters and give them a chance to shine. So the Beast was already a popular character, to be sure, especially with his status as a much-beloved member of the X-Men. But this particular story focuses on a point in his past that was a source of trauma for him, and it carries forward into the present, and basically the past kind of comes back to haunt him. But the story's not all doom and gloom, and there's quite a bit of comedy in between. So it starts off as a drama, becomes a bit of a comedy, and then ends as a drama. So, the bookends work rather well. But another source of fascination for this story, at least from my perspective, is the fact that the artwork is done by both Rob Liefeld in the first 2 chapters and Jae Lee in the rest of the chapters. So Rob Liefeld is an artist who is popular but nonetheless very controversial when it comes to, say, how people view him as an artist. And he's arguably best known for co-creating the characters of Cable and Deadpool, but on the downside, he also has questionable views on how the human anatomy works, at least in regards to proportion. And he also has the rather annoying habit and frequent habit of swiping from other people's artwork. And so he's an artist that I honestly think could have been a good artist, and has at times even drawn work that I would consider to be good artwork. But for just case in point here, his earlier work, you can actually see that he was on fire. Like, he had a hunger, a drive to be successful as an artist. And so whether or not you liked his work when he was starting out, you look at his early work and you can tell that this is someone who's actually trying, versus, say, after he got famous, which happened shortly after he started out, oddly enough, he seemed to lack much in the way of incentive. He was still drawing, but you started to notice that he basically just kind of copied some of his own stuff. Like, people would be positioned in ways that he'd already used in other books that he had done. And that's just one thing. But seeing his work here in the story focusing on Beast, it's rather unfortunate that his work for this particular story was only in the first 2 chapters, because you look at his work here, it's genuinely good. And this is something that surprised me, this was a surprise for me, because Liefeld is someone that I have a soft spot for, in the sense that I was born in the 80s, raised in the 90s, and so I read a lot of 90s comics. And so, you got him, Jim Lee, Todd McFarlane, hot artists like that. I'm going to look at their early work, and I'm going to be like, I'm going to enjoy it, in a good way, because these were guys who were on their, they were enthusiastic, they had the energy, the drive, they were trying, And so, whereas, say, Todd McFarlane and Jim Lee actually got better as time went on, Rob Liefeld, I think what happened with him was that, starting off, like I said, he was hungry, he was trying, but then, because his art style was so distinctive, at the point in time where he was working in comics, basically he kind of became an overnight sensation. And so, he was even on talk shows and what have you. And it seems like once he got famous, he seemed to lack the incentive to improve himself as an artist. And so I remember there was like an interview with someone that had worked with him at DC back in the day, because he actually started off at DC Comics as opposed to Marvel. But I forgot who it was that this interview was with. It was, I believe, it was an editor or a writer, but this person made a good point about him. They said, this was when he was literally just starting out before he, switched over to Marvel. But this person was saying that Rob Liefeld had it, as in he had the talent, he just didn't have it yet. And I thought that was a very appropriate description of his artwork, because especially looking at his early art, there's a lot of potential there, and sometimes even moments where the artwork comes out as good. Like, there are individual pictures that he's drawn where the artwork is actually very well done. Now, if you try to, say, put him on a monthly book, that's where you can see where this is someone who still needs some work. But the potential was there. And so, as I mentioned, looking at his work in this Beast story, it's legitimately good. And it's just a pity that, on one hand, it's only for the first 2 chapters that he's on the book, and 2, the talent that was on hand in that he displayed just within these 2 chapters, it's a bummer that he didn't expound on that, because you look at his work here, even if it's only for just 2 chapters, it's very well done. But if you look at his work, say, after this book, say like maybe a year or 2 later, and it's just not the same. Like, you could see someone getting complacent and not even trying, that kind of thing, just relying on stuff that got him to where he was, but not going anywhere beyond that. But on the other hand, you have Jae Lee, who, as far as I know, has no relation to Jim Lee, just same last name. But Jae Lee actually got his start, doing comic book art with this particular story, if I remember correctly, because he had done some cover art here and there, I think. I could be mistaken about that, but I think as far as like his first, full-on, comic book story, Just Friends was his first work, starting with issue 3. Actually, no, I take that back, because Rob Liefeld did the majority of the artwork in the first 2 chapters, but there was like a page or 2 that Jae Lee did, and then from 3 onward, he was the regular artist for the particular story. And Jae Lee is someone who has gone on to improve his craft over time, much like Jim Lee and Todd McFarlane had. And so Jae Lee could arguably be lumped in a similar category as these hot artists, but he actually got better as time went on. Not to say that his work here is bad, but in comparison to, say, what came years later, you can see where, this is someone who has improved their craft, like they've, gained experience and what have you. And so one of the things that Jae Lee was known for, at least within the 90s, was that he became the regular artist for the book Namer the Submariner, which had previously been done by John Byrne. And I've never actually read that particular book, but I have seen some of his artwork from it, and it's very distinctive. And I mean, there's kind of like a Sam Keith feel mixed with Bill Sienkiewicz. But imagine, say, if Sam Keith had, drawn people with something resembling proper proportion. I mean, you still have that sketchy quality, which is more along the lines of Sienkiewicz, but there's kind of like an abstract feel when it comes to the scenery that someone like Sam Keith would do. But the people are proportioned a little more realistically, as in comparison to, say the abstract style of Sienkiewicz or Sam Keith, but there is that sort of visual flair from those 2 artists that kind of carries over to Jae Lee's work. But anyway, though, so you have 2 different art styles for this particular story, and you kind of see 2 artists who are popular to this day at very different points in their careers, because Liefeld, I think at this point in time, I think he was already working on the New Mutants book, but I think this was around the time that he was starting to work on X-Force, which is what New Mutants eventually became. But that could be a reason as to why Liefeld only did the first 2 chapters, because he does unfortunately have a reputation for struggling with deadlines. And so oftentimes, if he's a regular artist on the book, I mean, it's considered an accomplishment if, he actually does, 5 or 6 issues before having to get a fill-in artist, that kind of thing. But a couple of things I read online about the timing of this book, and it seems to indicate that this is an instance wherein, this wasn't him, struggling with, procrastination or something like that. This was like an instance where, he started work on this book, but then he got the gig to be the regular artist on X-Force, which he was also working on as far as plots and what have you. So, I guess it was just timing-wise, he could only do the artwork for the first 2 chapters, but he had a gig as a regular monthly artist at the same time, and so that's something that kind of took precedence. So this was an instance where, as much flack as people like to give Liefeld, well, this was a case where he had a perfectly valid reason to have only done the work on the first 2 chapters, hence where Jae Lee came in. But Jae Lee, though, kind of makes the story his own once he takes over on art. And for a first-time artist, it's pretty good stuff. I mean, it's very energetic, very distinctive, and it's not just copying the artist that came before him, namely Liefeld. But so you have 2 different types of artwork on hand here, and they're both very good works of they're works of art. They're pieces of art that are done by 2 very different artists with their own energy, so to speak. But the story, though, it starts off with a kind of a flashback where you see the X-Men in their younger days, with their blue and yellow outfits. And this is around the time where Hank had just joined the X-Men, and he's basically gone nuts here, and he's trying to attack Professor Xavier, and the rest of the X-Men are trying to hold him back. But then Xavier sort of calms things down and says that he'll talk with Hank in a little in about 10 minutes or so, and alone. And so the reason that Hank had gone nuts was because shortly after having joined the X-Men, he had tried to call home and tried to call a friend of his. And this was a woman named Jennifer Nyles, who was probably one of the few legitimate friends they had, and was something of a love interest for him. And she was also one of the few people that knew about him being a mutant and wasn't afraid of him for it, whereas everyone else in his hometown ostracized him by most accounts. And so shortly after having joined the X-Men, he had tried to call home and tried to reach out to her and let her know that he's okay, but she didn't know who he was, and apparently neither did anyone else in his hometown. And so he realizes that Professor X must have done something to them. And so that's why he kind of snapped, because Jennifer was like one of the few friends, let alone love interests they had, wherein the interest was reciprocated. And this is someone that he really cared about. And so he confronts Xavier about it, and Xavier admits that he basically mind wiped the whole town, or at the very least, he mind wiped the people who knew who Hank McCoy was, and also knew of his secret of being a mutant, because in Xavier's mind, any new recruit that they get, if they have close ties to friends and loved ones, then that's a source for potential blackmail that an enemy could use against these particular recruits, and in turn the X-Men. And Xavier, he's got the whole dream about humans and mutants living together in harmony and what have you, but it's a war that has to be fought before this dream becomes reality. And so unfortunately, because Hank knew someone who in turn knew that he was a mutant and was close to him, this was someone that, according to Xavier, needed to be mind wiped. And so this is something that Hank hasn't talked about much, but fast forward to the present, he's sort of trying to dictate his life story, and it's clearly a source of trauma for him because he's trying to make jokes about it, but he just can't do it. Like, he can't just finish telling the story without shutting the recorder off and going off to something else to try and take his mind off of it. And it's at this point in time in the present where Hank is a member of X Factor, which is a group of mutants, namely the original 5 members of the X-Men. And so they're on this mobile headquarters called Ship, which is literally a ship that's sentient. And if I remember correctly, had formerly belonged to the villain Apocalypse. But at this point in the story, Beast is a member of X Factor, when they made their headquarters on the ship. And so while he was trying to dictate his life story into the recorder, Ship was listening to all this and was asking him, why didn't he finish, telling the story? And it was able to pick up on the fact that, this was a source of trauma for the Beast, but he just kept on trying to, pass it off as, something that, from his wayward youth or something like that. But he just doesn't want to talk about it, and it's clearly something that still hurts him. But right about then, he sees that there's a mail service courier that's trying to make their way to Ship. And at this point in time, the only way they could get mail was if someone took it over by a boat. And so, once that person, got close enough to Ship, which was floating in the air, then I guess it was teleported up. But Hank sees on the computer monitors that this courier is being attacked by what looks like a cyborg. And so Beast has Ship teleport him down to help the courier out. And he sees that this is a humanoid creature, this cyborg, that looks like a cross between a human and animal, and also, of course, machine. And so the two of them fight, but then the Beast finds out that this creature is very unstable because as soon as he gets a few hits in, the creature explodes. And so, he checks on the courier, makes sure she's okay, and he looks at the package that the creature was trying to wrestle from the courier. And he opens it up, and much to his surprise, this package for him contained an invitation from Jennifer Nyles, the very same woman that he was reminiscing about. And it's like, this is too much. This is too much. This is a crazy coincidence that's just too much for him. And so it's an invitation for a spot on this symposium in Brussels, wherein some of the world's greatest scientific minds are going to come together and have a conference about mutants and potentially mutant-human relations, going forward in the future. And Hank McCoy, being not only a mutant, but also a very bright mind when it comes to the subject of mutation, has received an invite. And so, he's looking at this invitation, and he's like making sure that he's not seeing things. And yes, Jennifer, this is the same Jennifer Nyles from his youth, and she did invite him to this symposium. And so he decides to go ahead and do it, and he heads on over to Brussels. And as soon as he gets over there, things start to go insane because he's attacked by a C-list mercenary called the Constrictor, who's basically ordinary flesh and blood human, albeit one that's somewhat skilled when it comes to, say, fighting and espionage. And he also has these coils of adamantium that he uses to disable his prey, or his victims, as it were. And so he runs afoul of the Constrictor, who apparently has a contract that's been put out on him. And so, he's once he and Beast get into it, Beast figures out that he figures out from the Constrictor that someone's trying to put a hit on him, but on the other hand, they both find out that the person that the Constrictor thought had put a hit on Beast was not that person after all. It was someone else entirely. And so then they also find out that these cybernetic creatures that have been going after certain scientists and anyone related to the Beast at this point are called Wereborgs, and the Wereborgs are in turn were designed by a scientist that's gone missing, and it seems that someone has continued this guy's work and used his research to make their own army of sort of undead animal/human hybrids. And while this is going on, another player comes into the mix. This old Fantastic Four villain by the name of Red Ghost, who, from what I remember, he does have the ability to turn intangible, but he also has a strange sort of telepathic bond with a group of apes, and that he basically considers to be his sons, and they help him commit crimes and what have you. It's a strange story. But so the Beast, he finds the Red Ghost, but the Red Ghost is supposedly the one that had hired Constrictor to kill Beast. But when Beast sees him, this is a guy who is barely coherent and seems to be dying. And so he confronts Constrictor about this, and Constrictor basically admits that he thought, the person who hired him said that they were from the Red Ghost, but he just didn't bother to check, which is kind of one of the reasons why he's at this point still a C-list mercenary as opposed to, say, a legit one. And so they both realize that something strange is going on here, because not only are there all these weird cyborg creatures going after them, but there's also someone who's trying to pull their strings. And then Beast finds out that his old friend Jennifer not only doesn't remember him still, but she also may be involved with this scheme with this, say, missing scientist, as well as the creation of these Wereborgs. And to add another confusing twist into the mix, it turns out these Wereborgs were the partial creation of a supervillain named Commander Courage, who basically kind of passed himself off as a good guy who worked with the government in Brussels, but he was the one who basically stole this missing scientist's research. And the reason this scientist had gone missing was because he had tried to test this technology on himself, and it ended up killing him. And so Commander Courage, who had been working with the guy, basically used the guy's research and the work they had already done on his own body and turned him into the first Wereborg. And the reason that these Wereborgs tend to be unstable is because they're constructed partially from dead tissue, and dead tissue tends not to be as durable as living tissue. And so Commander Courage, along with Jennifer Nyles' help, was basically going to have these scientific minds at this symposium, including Hank McCoy's mind, basically kind of have a sort of switcheroo with the Wereborgs, because the way Commander Courage sees it, if he can hijack some of the world's greatest minds on mutation, then that gives him stopping power when it comes to, say, his government and what have you. But then and it turns out that Jennifer Nyles is actually starting to remember Hank, because while she is working with Commander Courage, the reason that the Wereborg had tried to intercept that package that she had sent to the Beast, or to Hank, was because Commander Courage had kind of put 2 and 2 together, that she was actually starting to remember her connection with Hank. And the fact that she had invited him was, on one hand, part of the plan to get all these scientists in one place, but it also was, on her part, a way of reaching out to the friend that she was missing. And so while all this chaos is going on, you eventually find out when Hank and Jennifer, they finally reconcile and they come together while all this chaos is going on. And you find out that even though Professor Xavier had mind wiped her, she had cared so much about Hank that when she woke up the next day after having been mind wiped, I mean, even though she didn't know who Hank was or anything like that, or she had no memory of him, she felt like a part of her soul had been ripped from her, and she just didn't know why. And so all these years, this experience of having this memory taken from her, even though she didn't remember this memory, she knew that something had happened. And so she had gone into the fields of science and, say, brain chemistry and memory and what have you. And so it was in her search to fix this missing memory, or the issues that cause memory lapses and what have you, that brought her into contact with Commander Courage, who in turn was trying to mastermind this crazy criminal scheme to take over the minds of the world's foremost scientists in the case of mutation. And it was just all one big massive coincidence that Hank got involved in the first place. I mean, he was invited to the symposium because of his authority on the subject of mutation, but also the fact that he and Jennifer had the connection that they did, and they're only just now coming back into contact with each other. All one big crazy coincidence, especially with the presence of Red Ghost, and the fact that Commander Courage had him abducted and basically tortured to a point where he's in the deteriorated state that he is in now. But Commander Courage was basically wanting to use his connection with his super apes to help him out in his own schemes. And so then you have Constrictor, who doesn't like being used and decides to work with his former mark. And so question is, can Constrictor and Hank work well enough together to not only save Jennifer, but stop Commander Courage from implementing this crazy scheme? And so this is a story that, on one hand, can be a little convoluted in the sense of all this crazy stuff going on, but at the same time, there's a rather, strong focus on the character of Hank McCoy. So regardless of how crazy things get in terms of the actual plot, the fact that we're in the shoes of a character who, despite their bestial nature, is very human and very relatable and very endearing to us as readers, we don't mind going along for this crazy ride. Even though we might have to backtrack here and there to understand a connection, everything does kind of come together in a way. Now, I will say that, the scheme of Commander Courage and his motivation is probably the weakest part of the book, even though it does result in some good and, either, good action scenes or some comical moments. I feel like his motivation, it feels very, how shall I say this? It's something that you would expect from a mad scientist or a would-be supervillain, trying to make his mark and what have you. And so that's an element that just kind of reminds the reader that, excuse me, it reminds the reader that yes, they're in a crazy comic book story, or they're just in a comic book story. And but on the other hand, though, when it's focusing on Beast and the trauma that happened with him, and how basically, he's trying to use humor to cope with the pain of having lost someone that he'd really cared about over the years. I mean, that's some stuff that I really appreciated seeing, because he's your lovable, your big blue monster, but at the same time, this is something that I think gives you an understanding of the character as to why he oftentimes uses humor as a coping mechanism, because it goes back to when he was younger. And it also calls into question the morality of someone like Professor Xavier, because while yes, he does have a point about, say, supervillains being able to use his recruits against him in his dream. At the same time, this is a point where the X-Men were teenagers, and so you could argue that Professor Xavier is in the business of using child soldiers. And so, you factor that, into the equation, plus the fact that he has a penchant for mind-wiping people, without, say, certain parties' permissions. It really results in Professor Xavier looking like not such a good guy, at least at this point in time. But because you really see the impact that would have on someone, like maybe it's like witness it's kind of like witness protection in a way, except with the mind-wiping technology of that tool from Men in Black. You hold it up, flash a light, and suddenly all the memory's gone, that kind of thing. Except in this case, it's one mutant that causes you to forget things, or what have you, because he is a telepath. And so Professor X does not end up looking like such a good guy, and you really do feel sorry for Beast, because on one hand you got some very good writing that captures the human trauma of the moment, but you also have, at least within these moments where the flashbacks are happening, this is where the surprisingly good artwork by Rob Liefeld comes in, because not only is he drawing the X-Men in their younger days, but he does so in such a way to where it's like, man, this is good artwork by him. It's good proportion, good view of the human anatomy and what have you. And even though Beast still looks kind of exaggerated for his character, it works though, because Beast was a bestial guy even before he had hair, all the blue hair. Like, he was a big hulk of a dude. And so this was an instance where, for that particular character, Rob Liefeld's exaggerated views of the human anatomy actually worked. And it also helped that everyone else in these flashbacks actually looked normal. So good on Liefeld. And also, once it turns over to Jae Lee, though, and the story takes place for the most part at the present, that's where you also have another distinctive form of art. And it's not just Jae Lee trying to ape the person who came before him. It's, he's trying to make his own mark. And so it's kind of hard to describe his style, because on one hand, the people, everyone, as far as, human anatomy looks, or humanoid anatomy looks, it all looks pretty good, nothing over exaggerated. But at the same time, the way the backgrounds oftentimes blend with the characters, there's a sort of sketchy quality to them, like something that, Bill Sienkiewicz would do. And yet, it's like you got the sketchy quality of the backgrounds kind of blending with the sort of grounded forms of the characters and what have you. And so it's an interesting style, sort of a surreal look to it. But I did like also Hank's interplay with the character Constrictor, because Constrictor, you see him in this story, and you can tell right off the bat that this guy is basically an amateur when it comes to mercenary work. But at the same time, though, there's a sort of stubborn quality to him, to where it's like he, regardless of what he's hit with, regardless of how badly he's embarrassed, he's going to do his assignment, and at the same time, he's also going to try to come up with some good puns, because that is kind of a running gag with him. Like anytime he tries to get the drop on Beast, he has some sort of dramatic war cry, but each time it sounds cheesier and cheesier, and Beast ends up trying to help him, that kind of thing. And I like that, because it's like when they're fighting each other, there is that sort of witty repartee, but then when they're working together, they kind of become like an unlikely, duo of frenemies, and yet at the same time they've got the war cry, or the cheesy one-liner game going in between each other while they're fighting the Werborgs and what have you. And so I thought that was actually pretty funny. And the Werborgs, I thought, were interesting creations. From a visual standpoint, as well as from the idea of what they were trying to do with the creation of them. But I do think that for characters that look as menacing as the Werborgs do, it was kind of a pity that they were so easily taken out. I mean, yeah, you do get some explanation as to why they're so weak, physically speaking. It's because they're being designed from dead tissue, and I mean, I can understand that. But when the Werborgs are designed, to look as intimidating as they are, you kind of expect them to last longer, even if going up against the protagonist of the story. And it was pretty cool to see the Beast both in his younger days and in the present, because let's see. Scott Lobdell. Yeah, Scott Lobdell does a good job of, keeping the character consistent, whether it's in flashback or it's in the present. And when it came to, say, the reunion between Hank and Jennifer, I thought that was a very touching moment, and it really brought back the human element that was on hand in the beginning of the story. And so it's like you finally get that payoff, and the two of them, they reconnect with one another, and Jennifer, finally remembers Hank and describes what it was like, because, she, basically tells him what it felt like for her to have a piece of her, life missing all of a sudden one day. And seeing him again just brings it all back, but, all the good memories, that she had of him. And it was until now, she had completely forgotten about. And so I thought that was a very nice moment. And I thought it was kind of surreal, though, having the two of them have this moment of bonding and reconnection, and holding each other while all this chaos is going on, because there's this big fight going on between the Werborgs, Commander Courage, and Constrictor, as well as a friend of the missing scientist, who's kind of take it upon himself to try and solve this mystery. So it's a pretty crazy fight scene, but in the midst of all this, I mean, you have this really nice, beautiful moment between, Hank and Jennifer, and the two of them, just seeing each other for the first time in all these years. And so I thought that was kind of, nice. And, of course, you got the ending where it's kind of a bookend in a sense of carrying the drama from the beginning and bringing it back to the ending, So it's like all the craziness and chaos of the middle part of the story, it all just, it's fun and everything, but it's nice that they actually were able to slow things down by the time the end came around. So that way there's that sense of human closure. And so so it's a story wherein you kind of come away with a better understanding of who Beast is as a character. And I mean, yeah, there have been some lip service paid over the years, prior to this story, of him having had a rough past and having been mistreated and what have you. But when you see him in these flashbacks, though, you really do see what it was like for him, because even though he had few friends, he did have people that he cared about. And so that just kind of made the human tragedy of his story all the more potent. And And so yeah, and you also understand why Hank resorts to humor so often. And I mean, so it's like, I mean, he's a funny character and everything, but you realize now it's like that's why he's trying to laugh so much, because if he doesn't, he's going to break down on the inside, even though this happened so long ago. It's something that still stayed with him. And he decided to go along with Professor X's dream, and for the greater good and all that. But it doesn't mean that the, pain ever really went away. And so I really appreciated the fact that we got to see this inside look into Beast. And, but yeah, all in all, though, this was a good story. I thought it was well written. I mean, the plot itself could have been, I think, a little less convoluted in some ways. But overall, though, the fact that we're focusing on the character, the Beast, every step of the way, it's like we know that we're in good company on a rather chaotic ride. So, I'm gonna go ahead and give Just Friends 4 out of 5 stars. This was a good story. The writing overall was good, and so was the artwork. And if you're a Beast fan, this is definitely a good story for you. So, and just a good story in general. If you get a chance, unless they make the story available in trade paperback sometime, definitely check out issues 85 through 92 of Marvel Comics Presents, because that's where you'll get the story. But before I go, I just wanted to show some of the artwork real quick. So, all right, so here's the cover of issue 85. Really cool Sam Keith cover with Wolverine on there. Then you turn it around. There we are, Beast. And you got Speedball and Firestar too. But see, this back cover is by Jae Lee. So this is what I meant when I said he did some cover art here and there. So this is one of those here and there moments. And then you had 86. There's Sam Keith cover. Right here in the corner, you got Beast from his X-Men days. Turn it around. There's Beast again. Firestar and Paladin. And there's our blue guy. So here's 87. And turn around. Here's 88. There's our guy. '89. And so 89 was actually the last issue of Marvel Comics Presents where you had the front and back cover kind of being one picture. So starting with issue 90, Marvel Comics Presents turned into a flip book. So here's one cover, then you turn it around, here's another, and Beast is in the corner here as opposed to being on one of the front covers. Here's 91. There's the back art, or reverse cover. And there's Beast in the corner right here. 92. It is right there. So yeah, so these were the covers, but I'll go ahead and show y'all some of the interior art real quick so you can see what I'm talking about with Rob Liefeld and Jae Lee. So here, this is the first page from the story. And then this is Rob Liefeld's art, and it's actually pretty good. Like, see, like right here, I don't know how well y'all can see this, but when you're reading the story, and this is where Beast is telling Professor X what happened, like how he tried to call home and tried to call Jennifer, but it was like no one knew who he was. And I thought, Liefeld actually did a pretty good job of, drawing a face, with the tears that would kind of convey that. So here we are back in the present. And once again, this is Liefeld in art, and he does a really good job of drawing Beast. And this is a random page that Jae Lee did. So not much to look at on that first page, but... And that's SHIP. That's X Factor's headquarters. And there's the Wereborg right there. So yeah, I mean, as you can see, the artwork that Liefeld did on the parts that he worked on was really good work, actually. And I just wish that he'd actually pursued that level of effort. But like right here, see, usually, when Rob Liefeld draws someone, they end up usually looking like this, which if you're trying to draw an ordinary human, that's not a good look because everything's out of proportion and what have you. But this is Hank McCoy. This is Beast we're talking about. So this is a case where, Liefeld's sort of exaggeration of the human anatomy actually works, in my opinion. Also, I like the background, the clouds and trees and what have you. So see, some pretty good stuff. And there he is back in the present here, but this is the friend of the missing scientist that kind of tags along with Hank. So yeah, those were the issues where Rob Liefeld did the artwork. So, starting with the third chapter in issue 87, this is where Jae Lee took over. So this is what I meant when I said, like, his style, it sort of has your ordinary comic book feel to it when it comes to, say, drawing a humanoid character, but there's kind of a, Bill Siekovich look when it comes to, say, the background, because it's like the background's kind of blending into the character in a way. And that's Constrictor right here. So see, he does a pretty good job of, making the characters look, like humanoid characters, but then he's got the background there. Now that I'm looking at it, it kind of looks like something you'd see in a manga or an anime or something, with all the, lines between them. And here's right here. That's when Beast sees Red Ghost for the first time. That's when he realizes that, hey, Red Ghost couldn't have been the one hired Constrictor, because this guy's barely coherent, There's the Constrictor, he's got him in his coils there. So I'll show you just a couple more pages real quick. So here we are, another flashback. Once again, this is Jae Lee on the art. Both, I thought, Rob Liefeld and Jae Lee did a good job when it came to, say, drawing the beast, say like in a flashback and sort of having an emotional breakdown there. But yeah, so that was just kind of to give you all an idea of what the artwork was like. You all saw some of the Liefeld art, and you all saw some of the Jae Lee art. So that way y'all can see what I'm talking about when it comes to, say, the difference in art styles. But yeah, if y'all made it this far, thank you very much for taking the time to check out my review, and I hope you all enjoyed listening to my thoughts on the storyline. And if you're a fan of the Beast, definitely look into Just Friends. So thanks for taking the time to check us out. You got any questions, comments, drop a line, let me know. And if you like what you see here, please feel free to subscribe. Y'all take care. Bye.